So frankly, when you look at the SME sector, as Faraz said, we're the number one bank in terms of SME lending. When we look at the agri sector, again, we are the number one as far as direct farmer lending is concerned. So that's like the micro numbers for HBL, and then obviously HBL Microfinance has additional learnings and numbers. But when you look at the macro picture that Faraz painted and the conversations that have happened in the morning session, the clarity is that what we're talking about is being number one in a very small space. Our key to success really may or may not be the full model for the future as we look to rapidly expand the opportunities in this space. So what were the advantages that we had? One was, the 1,700 plus branches that we have all across Pakistan. So that gives us feet on the street. It gives us a pulse on the customer. So I think when we talk about, and this is a digital conference, but we should not forget at the end of the day, we're talking about human beings. We're talking about small sole proprietorships, small partnerships, and character becomes the first thing. We have looked at our existing customer base. Our strategy has always been expand the number of customers that we have at HBL. So when I look at the number of customers and compare against the next two larger banks, we still exceed in terms of number of customers that we have, which is about 38 million customers on our books. The second piece is, and I've talked about this again and again, we have to look at this as a business proposition. We have to look at it as a segment, a profitable segment that we need to get into, which means we have about 800 people, that are deployed in the origination as well as maintenance of these facilities. There is a segregation between identification, the initiation and booking, the life cycle management, and the collections management. You need to have the models in place, both in SME as well as the agri and the agri-related SMEs. The other element that we need to look at, which is going to be exceedingly important, and that is what the conference is about, is the supply chains, is looking at that flow, getting the data from it to make the sound credit decisions. And that's going to allow for expansion of this as an industry. All of us have a role to play in it. But until and unless we invest in this business and put that right structure in place, we will lose. So for example, Salimullah Saab talked about, cash flow lending collateralized. Out of our 100 billion, we've crossed 20 billion in terms of pure cash flow, non-collateralized lending, and our delinquency numbers are looking very, very healthy within our portfolio estimates. And that is based because, given our size, we have a lot of large corporates, we have a lot of large M's within the SMEs, we have the small segment, and we also have the micro segment. So I think for us, the opportunity is now, how do we leverage the combination of increased digitization? And we talked about, incentives to get, more digital so that that data can become available. But ultimately, I think we will need to get to a place where we also supplement it by incentivizing cash. Because as long as cash is the easiest option, we will continue to have a very obscure line of sight at the grassroots level. So we now have cash well embedded in the corporates, the elimination of that. We have the elimination of that relatively well embedded in the medium-sized enterprises. But on the small scale, we still have cash collections that go directly to the distributors. If that cash collection can go into that small entity's bank account versus the collection, and that becomes a digital transaction, I think the line of sight, the visibility into the small sector will significantly increase. Similarly, we've got a lot of wallets out there. I was sitting with Farooq, who's just moved over to Jazz, right? We have our own wallets as well under Connect. So what we are using these wallets today is primarily, for either recharge of prepaid cell phones or for transferring money. So we're using that as churn. How do we use that data that the telcos have and that large banks that have wallets, they already have that data. That's the next step that we're focusing on, that if we can also look at digitizing the micro segment, then we've got an ecosystem that really covers the entire industry. The other element for us is, from a country perspective, our direction over the next 5 years is to go from import-led GDP growth, to an export-led, value-added export-led GDP growth. In that transition, as we look at the small sector, as we look at all of these, we must prioritize, in addition to female entrepreneurship and others, the export-related downstream industries. And it could be as simple as somebody making buttons or somebody making tags, but ultimately they're going to get used in a made-up garment for export. So what is the value creation we can do? We need to stop sending low value added or no value added exports. We need to start to look at packaging. So when you look at examples of what some of the industries have done in the spices, and now that is packaged and exported, the value that you gain versus sending a bag of red chilies, is much more when you package it, in easy to use mixtures. So similarly, there's a lot of low value added or no value added that gets exported. How do we capture the value addition in Pakistan and take it forward? Lastly, when we start looking at industrialization, or rather re-industrialization of Pakistan, we must stop looking at this is what we're doing to fulfill local demand. Unless we see this factory or this industry being set up that is going to export a portion of what they are making, we are again running into an import-driven GDP growth for local consumption. So I think for us, from my perspective, there is no substitute for the knowledge of the individual borrower, the feet on the street, and the ability to keep a health check of your credit. But the more we digitize, the better data we get, the cost gets taken out of the acquisition and the maintenance and the life cycle. And thirdly is prioritizing the export industry, the value adds. Those would be the three big things, I think, for us, which is the way forward, as well as mobilizing the micro base, which then becomes a feeder for the small businesses.
Thank you very much, Nassir.